Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another session at the Risk Awareness Week 2020. It is my great pleasure to welcome Sam Savage and Bridget Cash for this session. And I'll hand over to Sam to do the introductions and tell you all a little bit about what the session is going to be about. And don't forget to ask questions underneath this video, be interactive, talk to each other, to other participants, and ask questions to our speakers. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'm Sam Savage, Executive Director of probabilitymanagement.org. We're a nonprofit that's trying to improve the communication and calculation of uncertainty. And Bridget Cash is heading up our collaborative pandemic modeling initiative, which she'll tell you about in a second. I think the thing that really motivates me is all the problems that occur in risk modeling if you use single numbers to represent uncertainties. So I call this the flaw of averages. And I think the most stark example would be what would happen. Let me grab my die over here. Imagine this as an uncertainty, right? And life is a crapshoot, we all know that. What most people are doing is practicing for this crapshoot with a single number. They pick the average. Well, that's like an average die, 3.5 dots on each side. That is the correct average, when you roll a die, but it's not enough to really do modeling. So I'd like to give you a couple of examples of the flaw of averages and then kick it over to Bridget to show how we are thinking of applying this to COVID modeling. So here's an example of the flaw of averages. A statistician who drowns in a river that's on average 3 feet deep. And how do we model this? So I want to give Bridget credit for really this way to describe something mathematical about the way we would, say, estimate the chances that the statistician will drown. So the first thing is to quantify the uncertainty mathematically. So here what we've done is we're going to take the statistician and put him down in the river at random. And what is the chance he's going to drown? So I measure the height of the river at all these places, and you can look at the top. This array at the top represents the uncertainty of the river. Well, most of the time it's 1 foot, and occasionally it's 5 feet, and here it's 16 feet. And we call this array a sift, which stands for Stochastic Information Packet. And so that's the way we could convey the uncertainty of the river. Now, how do we estimate the chance that the statistician drowns? That's a simple formula in Excel. First, we count, let's assume the statistician is 6 feet high, all right? So we count all the places where the thing is over 6 feet. And there are 50 altogether, right? And then we divide by 50 and we see there's an 18% chance that he'll drown. If I throw in a shorter statistician, a 5-foot statistician, that goes up to a 22% chance. And one of the things I think it's so important to think about is I like to talk about the arithmetic of uncertainty. And to define that, arithmetic can tell you that x plus y equals z. The arithmetic of uncertainty says, what do you want z to be? Here are your chances. So let me show you one other example of the flaw of averages, a little more sobering. Consider a drunk wandering back and forth along a busy highway. His average position is the center line. That means that the state of the drunk at his average position is alive. But on average, he's dead. That's just not close enough. And yet, many forms of analysis are done that way. Let me talk about the pandemic in this metaphor. We're quite uncertain about the trajectory that COVID will take. And it's tempting to just think about the average case. Well, that's putting the drunk back on the center line. Now, in the case of COVID, imagine that the center line is sort of the point at which you would swamp your ICU capacity in your hospitals. If you're just under that level, everything's great. But once you swamp your ICU capacity, the mortality rate goes way up for this disease. So imagine that wandering to the right means that you're swamping your healthcare system, and wandering to the left means that you're crashing your economy. There are these two conflicting objectives. And I wrote about this recently in my blog at probabilitymanagement.org. I think the important thing to do is look at this diagram down here. The diagram is really based off of modern portfolio theory dating back to Harry Markowitz in the 1950s. When you have conflicting objectives, along the bottom, we have a healthcare objective. And I have put worse healthcare outcomes on the right and better on the left. Because Harry Markowitz, when he did his risk-return graphs for portfolio theory, put increasing risk on the x-axis, going out that way. On the y-axis, we have either a better economy or a worse economy. And there are trade-offs here. And it's above my pay grade to decide where to go on the trade-off curve. These are all rational trade-offs. That is, here's the best economic outcome, here's the best healthcare outcome. But I can certainly tell you that anything that is to the southeast of these points is just plain nuts, because this means worse economy and worse healthcare outcomes. Now, solving these problems mathematically would be difficult, but it would be better than not trying to solve them. And in thinking about this problem, one of the things that probabilitymanagement.org has done by allowing you to communicate uncertainty through SIPs is that we can effectively decompose the modeling and decentralize the modeling approach and make it collaborative. And so Bridget and I have been working on this for quite a few months now, and inspired by some work we were doing with a couple of healthcare organizations and discussing it with them. And this has led to a collaborative pandemic modeling initiative that Bridget is heading up. And with that, Bridget, I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Sam. I will share my screen here. Okay, so as Sam said, I'm looking at stochastic contagion models in relationship to pandemic modeling, but it can be applied very broadly in a variety of contexts, which we can go into a bit. For the slides that I have today, I just want to reiterate some of the points that Sam made about the flaw of averages, the drunk in the road analogy, the statistician in the river, like showing the difference between a stochastic model and a deterministic model, and I'll explain that with an example. And then we can look at how we can use individual models to help inform other models, and then sort of the culmination of that is to optimize decision-making through portfolios. So I just want to go into this little demo of a deterministic versus a stochastic model. So early on in the pandemic, we looked a lot at contagion sample paths. And we heard a lot of discussion about R0, right? What the reproductive rate of the contagion was, and how R0 is being estimated. So this path right here shows one estimate of R0. It's somebody's average, it's someone's best guess, and we see one possible path over time. Now, that's a deterministic model. A stochastic model is going to take into account the standard error or the uncertainty of that assumption, and model all the possible outcomes, or simulate all these possible sample paths. So here we see the same path because we have a standard error of 0. Sometimes people are calling it a confidence interval, and there's lots of different statistical ways to describe this. But we can easily adjust for uncertainty and get a whole different picture. So here you can see the variety and the range of possible outcomes, and it's interactive. So the more uncertain we are, the more amplitude we'll see in the differences here. And in these interactive models, we can easily change our not assumption as well, and we'll get, again, interactive, real-time, different results. And we can capture all of those in SIPs. I'm told that this conference is covering SIPs in other areas, so I won't go too much into that, but it's a stochastic information packet. It's the input and output of all of the possible things, sample paths that we're simulating.
I'd just like to comment, each of those paths you were showing is like another path that the drunk could take down the highway.
Precisely. So here's just a screenshot from some more advanced contagion models. We can get really in depth into different variables and things like that. That's more for the individual modeler or situation as it calls for those specifics. And then again, I wanted to show the SIPs and how they are stored. And here we're calling this, if you can see my mouse moving, this is the Contagion SIP library. This is the output that we get from our stochastic model, where we have a variety of different outcomes and simulations. So here I'm just kind of putting this into context. We've modeled the contagion, and through that we get an output SIP, and now we can use that SIP that we've created to look at other projects in the same environment. So if you have modeled the contagion in your geographic area or state or city or hospital, within that same environment, you can then model other things using that SIP. So here we'll look just at a hypothetical hospital model. The revenue, of course, increases with infection. And here, an insurance model, the revenue, of course, is decreasing with infection. And then viral testing, that, of course, also will, has really, we've seen increase with infection. So then each one of those kinds of models also produces a SIP. And we can put all of those together, something like this. They're all kind of color-coded for the different models that I was referencing. And we can see all of these SIPs. We can see the numbers. We can see here, I like that this shows the provenance. This shows that Sam L. Savage created these SIPs earlier this year. And so the data is auditable, helping with the confidence behind it and people being able to use it appropriately. So once we aggregate all of those, we get to another very useful tool, which is a portfolio model. This will help optimize decision making in that environment. So here, this is a research model, a teaching model, and right now we're just looking at the 3 different business units: insurance, hospital, and viral testing. And I believe that my axis is a little different from the blog that Sam showed you just a little bit earlier. So here we're looking at, this is economics or net present value. So this is money, right? So as you increase on the y-axis, you're going to have higher revenue. So that's optimal. And then on the x-axis, the lower risk is to the right. So the optimal part here is actually in the northeast quadrant. So what can we try here? We can put some of these things together and see what happens. It looks like hospital and viral testing are lower risk. So it makes sense that if we put them together, we should also have a low risk aggregated outcome. But here we see that's not true at all. What we learn when we experiment with this model is that we really need insurance to be included to hedge the risks, because it has a I have the wrong, I want the right word. It's a negative correlation with the infection rate, right? So it's really insurance that helps hedge either viral testing or hospital. You really need to have insurance included, which makes sense as well.
Yeah.
So this becomes a very powerful tool for optimizing whatever your endeavor is within your contagion environment.
Yep, great, Bridget. Would you go back to your slide that shows the whole set of models all together there? That's the slide, right? So what I'm going to stress here is we're not the ones building the models. The SIPMAS standard for moving these SIPs around can work with any model, in Excel, in R, in Python. You could have 10,000 people with abacuses using a SIP. So we're trying to create an open framework in which collaborative modeling can take place. And we built our own SIR model, contagion model, just internally to learn from it. But pretty much any contagion model would be able to generate a SIP library. I mean, it could be an agent-based model. It could be another compartmental model like the SIR model. And that the models, the economic models or healthcare models around hospitals or insurance companies and so on, could be built by different people on different platforms. And
Absolutely.
yet the integration could ultimately take place at the end across platforms.
So Alex actually just called it crowdsourcing, right? And this aggregation of SIP libraries can absolutely come from different sources. And the fact that the SIPs are auditable really helps to aggregate them together and build confidence. And this can be applied around the globe in many different capacities because the SIPs are open source, so to speak.
Right. So we're always looking for people who are interested in this initiative, who are modelers and would potentially have SIP libraries to offer. We've started doing this actually already, looking at school systems. So instead of a hospital and insurance company and viral testing, you might have a school district, and the question is, when should we open? And you don't want to make that decision based on some average contagion path.
So thank you, Bridget, for this introduction, and Sam, thank you for again setting the context and answering I think the fundamental question: deterministic versus stochastic. My dream is that one day after Risk Awareness Week 2099. After 100 years of Risk Awareness Week, hopefully people will stop asking that question, because the answer is so obvious. It's always stochastic versus deterministic. There's really no other way around. That's how we can make quality decisions. And so thank you for setting the context. But Bridget, let's talk a little bit about this, because this is amazing stuff. Crowdsourcing distributions, because as a chief risk officer of a large company, the one challenge, and I think it's an artificial challenge, I don't think it's real, but the one challenge that I get quoted by different parts of the business, by different risk managers and other companies, is how do we know what distributions to use? Where do we get the data? Because, I mean, truth be told, for some assumptions, to get the data in and to correctly store it as a probabilistic distribution, that's a lot of effort. It actually takes someone effort to do it, to collect the data, to aggregate it, and to properly store it. But with what you guys came up with, there's such a huge potential. Someone smart somewhere in a different part of the world can aggregate the data which is comparable and relevant to you and can store it in a SIP. And then with the click of a button, or specifically with the URL in a cell in Excel, you can pull it up and use it in any model out there. And that, I think, is just kind of the new frontier of proper quantitative risk analysis, where you don't have to do everything yourself. And I mean, this is just so bizarre, because I've at least once a week I would model some sort of investment project or a decision, and it is so bizarre that we have to come up with a SIP for foreign exchange, for example. Like, why would a risk manager of a single company have to come up with that when there are better people to simulate the behavior of foreign exchange? And surely that is a piece of the puzzle that is used by every model everywhere in the world whenever we do risk analysis. Same with inflation. I mean, why would I have to think about how to model inflation when surely somebody can do it better than me?
Well, I want to answer this with an idea I had just decades ago about this. Alex, are you generating your own electricity for your light bulbs?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you're not? Oh, how did that work? Oh, they took experts and they did it in a big building called a power plant, and then they run it over wires according to some standard current thing, right? That's what probabilitymanagement.org is trying to do, to develop the electric current standard for probability distributions, so you can have the experts generating on the other side of the world and delivering it to you as you need it, right? And that's comment one. Comment two is, you can try more than one expert's version of inflation rate, right? You're not limited to one. Takes us back to decentralized planning, where we've got competitive marketing environments,
Right. I think, Sam, you can speak a lot to this also, but I think in terms of getting, access to SIPs, I think we're pushing a culture change to publish and share information in a form that can be easily used. And I mean, there's different examples within the pandemic. For instance, University of Washington, Johns Hopkins, other institutions have more information to consume, right? And we want them, of course, to use our format so that it can be easily used in probability calculations and things like that. But in other industries, occasionally you see someone with a lot of confidence that publishes things. We've seen it in farming. I'm trying to think of other good examples, but we're looking to have this information shared with confidence around the globe, but also within people's organizations, companies, things like that. It may start internally, and it may be that people who become certified in probability management modeling are the first experts in sort of confirming, certifying, so to speak, the data.
Yeah, here. So you mentioned agriculture, finance. I'll tell you, financial engineering has been doing this for decades, but they did it in siloed applications. So, somewhere I'm listed as the inventor of the SIP. No, I'm the thief who stole it from the stochastic optimizers, but I'm more like the Robin Hood, because I democratized it. These ideas have been around for a long time, but there was no open standard. And thinking of other applications, let's think about cybersecurity. Now, I don't mean defending yourself against the hackers. The hackers have a much higher IQ than the COVID virus. They're an intelligent adversary. But the viruses that the hackers unleash can be modeled very much like the COVID virus. And I think it has great applications there as well. I want to say one more thing about the standard. It's an open standard. I think it's the only standard I know of for doing this. But I mean, if someone comes up with a better one, we'll adopt it. You know, there's nothing. We don't make a nickel every time someone uses a SIP. It's brought in other people, by the way. For example, many of your viewers have probably heard of Doug Hubbard.
He's
Doug,
also a speaker at the conference.
Yeah, Doug has been central in this, and I won't go into the details here, but in another session, I'll talk a little about that. Another really bright guy, Tom Keelan, has invented a new set of distributions called metalogs that greatly help to standardize and move probability distributions around. So we're a big tent. We welcome anyone who's interested in this stuff to contribute. And in particular, people who have contagion models or economic models, we'd like to see you using the SIP math standard and help you do that if you contact us.
If I could just add on to that, like in relation to metalogs and other technology, Alex mentioned even getting a SIP from a URL. Sam, you could probably speak more to how storage of SIPs is also getting easier and easier, and that will help the collaboration as well.
That's true. So the technology is charging along. The SIPs, as I showed you with a statistician in the river, and Bridget showed you coming out of the contagion models, is actually a lot of numbers. And well, we did some work years ago with Royal Dutch Shell, where the models we were aggregating were petroleum exploration models, and we needed to add them together to get the distribution of the entire portfolio. And we were storing like 50 million numbers in that application. And with the latest technology based on Doug Hubbard's work and Tom Keelan's work, we're getting those millions of numbers down to something about the size of a tweet. So the whole thing is becoming more efficient and easier to use. And we're seeing more and more other applications that are becoming stochastic. And two that come to mind immediately are there's a nonprofit at the University of Illinois called FarmDoc, which has a beautiful stochastic model of the future prices of soybeans and corn. Not a number. Oh, we think soybeans will sell for $9.50. No, a distribution of soybean prices. Another one is at the U.S. Geological Survey. You type in your latitude and your longitude, and it gives you a distribution of the G-forces of the earthquake you are likely to experience in the next 50 years or something like that, right? All this information is the kind of stuff that we can capture, store, and communicate through SIP libraries.
And this is wonderful stuff. So the listeners, because we have a mix of risk professionals who kind of then divide into two buckets, people who have never heard about stochastic and people who have applied stochastic risk analysis for ages. And then we have the much bigger pool, which is the decision makers, which are kind of just learning on how risk techniques and risk tools can help them make normal business day-to-day investment, strategic budgeting, pricing, and maintenance decisions. And I think the key takeaways are that there are simple and easy to understand applications of stochastic risk analysis, and that enriches your decisions significantly. And the second kind of key takeaway, which I'm just realizing, because I remember so recently we've been, Sam, with you recording this session for the Risk Awareness Week 2019, which was actually a year ago. But then you talked about having SIPs and slurps centrally for a company, and then that would stored somewhere on the clouds within the corporation, and then everyone within that company can use the same array of numbers, stochastic numbers, for any model that they build. And that just creates this consistency of modeling across the organization, which is amazing. I mean, not many organizations do that. And I thought, wow, that was amazing. I need to hurry up and implement it. I'm still in the process of implementing it in the company where I work. And now you've come up with something even better, which is the kind of next generation. Not only you can store it centrally within the corporation, you can actually use the SIPs created on a different part of the world that you can use in your model, because they've proved that they're consistently outperforming other models. It's a whole different world. So dear listeners, the opportunities are so amazing. We just need to catch up with Sam, because I'm kind of scared what you will come up with for the Risk Week 21. Because this is, I mean, I have a lot of catching up to do with this stuff. It opens up amazing opportunities for decision makers, where you can significantly improve not just this huge jump from deterministic to stochastic, but you also improve your kind of predicting power and the accuracy of your stochastic models as well. So thank you. What are, Bridget, any kind of final key takeaways, any ideas you want the listeners to take away from this session?
Thank you. I think mostly you've summed it up very well, but mostly it's that, you know, the power of aggregating SIPs and sharing information, you know, across your organization or across the world, and how you can, you know, with further techniques, you can really optimize, make better decisions, as you said, and we can get to a portfolio approach and stochastic optimization.
So, Sam, any thoughts from you?
No, I thank you for having us on, Alex, and please stay tuned. There's more to come.
Thank you. You know what I'm looking for? Just a final thought on this before we wrap up. And by the way, don't forget to ask questions underneath this video.
Yeah.
I want to wrap up on the final thought. Is I can't wait for a moment when somebody, like they always do, asks, where is this range coming from? So we added volatility to one of the assumptions in the model. We used the probability distribution, and the common question is, okay, where is this coming from? And usually I write like sources in a separate column. And so if somebody asks, where did you get this range from? And I would say something like University of Michigan, because they've researched it and they've back tested it, and it's the best SIP we could find for that specific.
Sure. Let me speak. So let me speak to that issue. So, you know, I always tell people that this stuff is easy to explain. The hard part is getting anyone to understand it. I mean, even really very bright people, physicists, mathematicians. I think it's because the idea is so simple, they're thinking there's something more profound. But people will often ask me, and this is an indication they don't exactly understand what we've done. They'll say, well, what kind of distribution would you use in the SIP? To which, you know, I answer, if probability distributions were beer, then the SIP is a beer bottle. Why would you ask the inventor of the beer bottle how to make beer, right? You can put vinegar in a beer bottle. You just can't sell it as beer. But I saw the most beautiful example of someone the other day at a healthcare company we're working with, who built a model for upper level management. And somewhere was the assumption about a distribution, I don't know, unemployment or whatever it was, okay? And when he got to that part of his Excel model, he clicked on a link and a PDF file came up of the academic paper that derived this distribution, right? I mean, and the beautiful thing about this is, I did not teach this guy how to model. I taught the guy who taught him how to model. So this was like my grand model, you know. I felt so proud. So things like that are beginning to happen now. And in another session, by the way, I know we're gonna have people from the Government Finance Officers Association, and they've done some wonderful stuff where they've gone out to like thousands of CFOs of municipalities, and they've kept track of the accuracy of their tax revenue forecasts. Like, well, I thought it was going to be 8 million, but it was 7.5 million, right? Or it was 9 million. By keeping track of that kind of data, they can basically come back to these people and say, well, here's how you guys do on average, right? Like watching baseball players, you know what? You're probably going to bat around, 300 at best. So the open standard allows us to have these conversations and to judge the relative merits of different estimates.
Yeah, totally. Which is, by the way, an invite for everyone to make sure you tune into that session with Sam Savage as well, because that will also be amazing. On that note, Bridget, Sam, thank you very much for sharing what you've done with our audience. I think it's absolutely amazing. I wish the future of probability management would happen sooner, because I don't think it's happening soon enough. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in the following sessions during the Risk Awareness Week. Don't forget to use the chat underneath for your questions.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.